Welcome back, Room 13. We are here to read by the Great Horn Spoon, and we are on Chapter 4. Chapter 4 is called The Pig Hunt. Here is our little picture for the chapter. You'll see it looks like Praiseworthy and Jack, and it looks like they have some kind of fruit with them. I'm not really sure what that has to do with the pig hunt. I don't think this picture is really helping me understand the chapter title so much. But knowing that the pictures from other chapters have helped us to know some of the story that's coming, maybe the picture of the fruit is something that will come in the story, but isn't really like the main idea. Because usually the chapter title tells us the main idea, right? So we'll just have to see. If you remember, in our first 3 chapters, we met our main characters, Praiseworthy the butler and Master Jack, and they are headed to California to find gold to help Jack's family. And if you remember, before they got their tickets to the ship, their money was stolen and they had to hide on the ship the Lady Wilma. They ended up finding the thief with the help of the pig we know as Good Luck, right? We also know that we have a captain of our ship, the Lady Wilma. His name is Captain Swain, and he seems to be a fair man who sort of likes Praiseworthy and Jack, right? He seems to have, you know, good feelings towards him. But we know that our captain is in a race for his ship to get to California, to make port in California, before this other ship called the Sea Raven. And since they've mentioned it so many times, we're thinking that it is a really important part of this story. So it's something we want to keep track of, right? So let's see what will happen in Chapter 4. Jack began to dread Sunday dinners. It was bound to be Good Luck's turn on the menu soon. The pig no longer came trotting after him. It was true, for Jack had tied up the pen to make it escape-proof. But the porker remained on his mind, if not at his heels. And then, with Rio de Janeiro only a few days away, Jack saw the cook leave the galley with a heavy meat cleaver in his hand. Good grief, thought Jack. He's going for Good Luck. Without a second thought, Jack went sliding down the nearest ladder. When the cook arrived at the animal pens, the porker was gone. And so was Jack. "It's that boy," he shouted, waving the meat cleaver. "Pigs is for eating, not for pets." Soon, even the gold seekers joined in the pig hunt, for the promise of fresh pork made their mouths water. They looked above decks and below decks. They glanced up masts and down ventilators. The cook himself went searching through the cargo hold, where Monsieur Gaunt, a Frenchman in the rough homespuns of a farmer, was watering his precious grape cuttings. They named this character like by his real name. They didn't just say like someone else on the ship. And the last couple of times they've done that has been because the character is important enough that we need to know their name. So I think this might be a character that I'm going to see more of and I might want to pay more attention to. So I'm going to remember this. Monsieur Gaunt. He's a Frenchman, and he's the one with the grapes that were down in the hold that we saw in Chapter 1, or we read about in Chapter 1. So I'm thinking this might be a new character that I want to pay more attention to, because the author gave me his name, gave me some specifics. "Have you seen a pig down here?" growled the cook. "No, monsieur," answered the Frenchman. "But the rats, oui." The chase continued. The pig hunters looked everywhere but the captain's stateroom, which was fortunate for Jack and Good Luck, were hiding behind the open door. "Not a sound out of view," Jack whispered. The pig, snorting out of sheer love, rubbed his ever-fattening side against Jack's leg. Shh. Just then, the captain himself could be heard approaching along the passageway. But when he entered his cabin, there was no sign of pig or boy. He hung up his blue cap, yawned, and took a nap. When he was sound asleep, Jack and Good Luck crept out from under the bunk, where there was hardly room to breathe. Jack looked around, wondering what to do next. It seemed hopeless, but he wasn't going to deliver up the porker to the cook without a battle. Leaning his bristled back against Jack's leg, the pig grunted a loud word of endearment and almost woke the captain. Jack's breath caught. Any port in a storm, he told himself, and ran. He made a beeline toward his own cabin, with Good Luck trotting along behind him. At that moment, Mountain Jim happened along the passageway, and the pig went through his bowed legs. If many gold seekers had joined in the hunt, others consider it sport to outwit the cook. Mountain Jim merely turned to give Jack a wink and went on his way. Once in his cabin, Jack stopped short. Dr. Buckbee was stretched out for a nap and snoring loudly. Moving on his toes, Jack approached his hammock. He would wrap Good Luck in a blanket and hide him in the hammock. But when Jack turned, his breath caught again. The porker had his 2 front hooves on Dr. Buckbee's bunk and had leaned his head closer to see what all the snoring was about. The horse doctor awoke. He found himself staring into a strange grunting face. Thinking he was set upon by map robbers, for he was more asleep than awake, he began to blow on his tin alarm trumpet. Remember, Dr. Buckbee has a special map to an area in California that has gold. Remember how he has it hidden on him, so he wears this trumpet in case anyone tries to steal it. So he's thinking Good Luck wants to steal his map. Jack was horrified. The trumpeting sounded like a sick elephant. It would bring the entire ship. It's only us, Dr. Buckbee, Jack cried, but he couldn't be heard over the blare of the horn. There was no way out of the cabin but the door, and it was too late for that. Quickly, Jack got his arm around Good Luck, climbed on a sea chest, and tried to stuff the porker through the brass porthole. But Good Luck got stuck half in and half out. Jack put his shoulder to the job, but it was no use. You're done for now, exclaimed Jack. Praiseworthy, hearing the alarm trumpet, was first in the cabin. What's this? He said, sizing up the situation quickly. A pig in a porthole? Have you seen the cook? Asked Jack desperately. He was still pushing against the pig's fat rump. A few paces behind, said Praiseworthy, opening his black umbrella. Step aside, Master Jack. When the cook entered, together with several gold seekers, there was no pig to be seen. Praiseworthy had taken up a position directly in front of the porthole, with his umbrella blocking the view. By then, Dr. Buckbee had stopped trumpeting. Robbers, he said, trying to get my map. I almost caught one of them, a big fellow with fat cheeks. A mere dream, said Praiseworthy. The cook raised his meat cleaver again. There's the boy. Where's my pig? Pig, said Praiseworthy. What pig? He's got it. And Praiseworthy turned to Jack. Pig? Pig? Master Jack, do turn your pockets inside out. Our chef seems to think you have a pig about you. The gold seekers began to laugh. There's no robber in here, or pig either. Come on, boys. But the cook turned at the door, squinting at Praiseworthy. It's none of my business, he said, crossing his fat arms. But do you even stand under the umbrella indoors? This cabin leaks shamefully, answered Praiseworthy. But it ain't raining. One can never be too careful in these latitudes, said the butler. Good day, sir. The cook left, shaking his head, and Praiseworthy folded the umbrella. When Jack glanced back at the porthole, his eyebrows jumped an inch. The pig had vanished. Look, Jack gasped. He's gone. He's gone. I declare, said Praiseworthy in genuine surprise. Jack stuck his head through the porthole and looked around. There wasn't a soul in sight, or a pig either. Jack left the cabin and ran out on deck, where he found Mountain Jim seated on an overturned barrel and playing "Oh, Susanna" on a mouth organ. "Have you seen a black pig, sir?" asked Jack, out of breath. "Seen him?" the Mountain Man grinned. "Why, boy, I'm sitting on him." And he tapped the side of the barrel with his harmonica. Jack wiped the sweat off his forehead and began to smile. "Thank you, Mountain Jim, sir." The porker was safe, at least for the time being. "I thought I'd near bear grease to get him out of that porthole. Sit down, Jackie boy, and we'll do a bit of singing to pass the time. I'll learn you how to trap a grizzly. A boy your age needs all the educating he can get." Jack seated himself beside the Mountain Man on the top of the barrel. Soon he was singing to the windy accompaniment of the mouth organ, drowning out any snorts or grunts of protest from the pig. "Oh, Susanna, oh, don't you cry for me. I'm going to California with my washbowl on my knee." When the cook passed, Mountain Jim lifted his yellow bobcat cap with one big hand and went on playing the harmonica with the other. After dinner and well after dark, Jack returned for the pig. A few feet away stood the small stern boat with a canvas thrown over it. He waited until the afterdeck was clear of passengers. Then he lifted the barrel, gave the porker a hug, and shoved him up under the gunwale of the boat. "Done," he said, straightening out the canvas. He supposed this cat-and-mouse game of cook and pig was doomed, but he wasn't giving up. "Good night, good luck," he whispered. The pig replied with a snort of true love and began scratching his back on the underside of the boat seat. Sunday passed without roast pork for dinner, and the following night, the Lady Wilma anchored off the green coast of Brazil. With the coming of dawn, the sidewheeler entered the channel and passed under the fortress guns of Rio de Janeiro. Praiseworthy and Jack stood on the forecastle with a warm breeze snapping their trousers. It seemed to Jack that he had almost forgotten what land looked like. The mere sight of a hill or distant tree excited him. And then the sunny harbor came into view, with church bells ringing out across the water. House windows reflected the dazzling morning sun. "Homesick, Master Jack?" asked Praiseworthy in a quiet voice. Jack looked up. "I wish Aunt Arabella and Constance and Sarah were with us, but of course the Gold Country is no place for women and children." "It's not too late to change your mind, Master Jack." "Change my mind?" The butler rubbed the tip of his sharp nose and looked down into Jack's eyes. "Cape Horn lies ahead of us. It's a bad stretch of water. Very bad indeed, the captain tells me. The wind comes howling in like banshees, and the waves can batter a ship to splinters. No one will think the less of you, Master Jack, if you leave the Lady Wilma here at Rio. We'll manage to get you a passage back to Boston." Jack turned away from Praiseworthy's gaze and tightened his eyes against the breeze. He felt a welling up inside him. Didn't Praiseworthy want him along any longer? "I'm not scared," he answered finally. There's this part where he said that he was welling up inside him. And it made me think, because he turned away from Praiseworthy and he focused on something else. And whenever I hear authors saying that there's like a welling up, it's usually like tears welling in your eyes, right? And so I'm thinking that maybe Jack is like hurt or offended that Praiseworthy thinks that Jack might be scared, or that this isn't a trip for Jack, because Jack specifically says, like, "I'm not scared." And he says, didn't Praiseworthy want him along any longer? And so I think the author really wants me to know, like not just by saying it, by showing it, that Jack is really upset by what Praiseworthy has asked here. He's turning away from Praiseworthy. He has this welling up feeling inside, and he's starting to feel like maybe Praiseworthy doesn't want him. And so I want to try and live in Jack's shoes here. Feel this kind of sadness that he's feeling as he has this conversation with Praiseworthy to help me better understand this story. "I'm not scared," he answered finally. "The thought hadn't crossed my mind. You said we were partners." "We are indeed, but I could never forgive myself if. Do you think we'll get smashed to splinters? The Lady Wilma's a stout ship. Do you think Captain Swain's a good master?" "None better," answered Praiseworthy. Jack looked back up into the butler's eyes. Go home? How could he go home without his pockets full of gold nuggets? "Then I'm going on to California," the boy said. "I'm not turning back. No, sir." He wiped his nose. "But if you don't want me for a partner anymore, why, Don't talk nonsense," interrupted Praiseworthy with a sudden smile as bright as the morning. "You said exactly what I thought you would, but I had to be sure. You'll do, Master Jack. You'll do." He put a hand on the boy's shoulder, and Jack looked up. He could feel the reassuring grip of Praiseworthy's fingers. The butler winked. Jack smiled and wiped his nose again. Above them in the pilot house, Captain Swain was looking for the Sea Raven among the ships at anchor. Their masts were as thick as reeds in a pond. Many were gold ships, like the Lady Wilma herself, pausing to take on fresh water and supplies. When the customs boat came alongside, Captain Swain shouted down, "Is the Sea Raven in port, sir?" "No, Captain. She left us 5 days ago." The ship's master greeted this news with his familiar roar. "Blast! Well, we won't tarry. By grabs, we'll sail tomorrow with the outgoing tide." While the Lady Wilma took on coal and fresh provisions, the gold seekers invaded the city. There were Americans everywhere. Jack posted his letter. If he had found his sea legs, he had lost his land legs. The cobbled streets of Rio seemed to pitch and roll under him. Praiseworthy had to use his umbrella as a cane until the city stopped heaving about. Heaving about. Oh, okay. So I've heard of sea legs, right? Which is once you get on a ship, because the ship moves a lot, it's really hard to stay balanced, right? So I guess if you've been on a ship a lot where, you know, things are going back and forth with the water and the tides and all that, that maybe you need to regain your land legs, like Jack was saying. So like being on ground where it's not moving all the time, you have to regain your balance. I think that's what they're saying, because they mentioned that the streets seem to pitch and roll, but streets don't do that unless there's like an earthquake. And they mentioned that Praiseworthy used his umbrella as a cane to steady himself. So they just must be trying to regain their balance on land. That helps me kind of imagine it more, what's going on here. Throughout the day, ships could be seen arriving and departing. Old friends from New Bedford or Salem or Concord met on streets thousands of miles from home. That night when Praiseworthy and Jack returned to their ship, their arms were loaded with exotic fruits never seen at home in Boston. Bananas and pineapples and guavas. When they awoke the next morning, the Lady Wilma was already setting a sea course with the outgoing tide. Jack stood at the cabin porthole and watched the city slip away, holding up its windows like mirrors to the pink dawn sky. After breakfast, Jack started for the stern boat with table scraps for good luck. Suddenly, he heard the blare of Dr. Buckbee's alarm trumpet. A moment later, the horse doctor appeared from a passageway with the trumpet at his lips, and his cheeks swelled out like apples. The noise brought passengers from every direction. "It's stolen!" Dr. Buckbee wailed, pausing for breath. "Gone!" "What's this?" said Praiseworthy, interrupting a stroll around deck. "What's gone?" "My gold map! I'm ruined!" The horse doctor gave a final wail on the trumpet. "My brother rest his bones, posted it to me as he lay dying in California, and now it's been stolen, gone. Cut-Eye Higgins, said Mountain Jim. But almost at once, it was discovered that Cut-Eye Higgins, too, was gone. He had been forgotten in the haste of coaling and watering the ship. And when Jack reached the afterdeck, he found that Good Luck, too, was missing. Even the small stern boat was there no more. All that remained was the canvas shaped over 2 empty boxes and a keg. "The scoundrel!" Captain Swain stormed. "He must have lit out the night we lay off Rio, waiting to enter the channel, rowed himself ashore." "Turn back!" commanded Dr. Buckbee, waving his tin trumpet and going around in a circle on his peg leg. "Impossible," answered the ship's master unhappily. "Then I'm ruined, sir, ruined." "Nonsense," said Praiseworthy. "I dare say there's more than one gold mine in California. You may be the first among us to strike it rich." You know, this is something I've noticed about Praiseworthy. When he's saying, like, I dare say you might still be the first one to find gold, it kind of reminds me of when he told the captain, even though the Sea Raven had lighter items on the ship and could probably travel faster, that it didn't matter how the beginning or the middle of the race went, that it mattered how things ended. And it makes me realize that, you know, Praiseworthy is fairly optimistic. We might use the word positive. Like he looks for the positives in things. That makes him optimistic. But he also seems pretty realistic. It's not that he always thinks things are going to turn out to their best. He just knows that our worst circumstance doesn't mean that that's going to happen to us. There's so many other things that could happen that just like the very best thing is unlikely to happen, the very worst thing is unlikely to happen. And I've kind of noticed that about Praiseworthy here when he says, you could still be the first man among us to strike it rich in California. Because just because, you know, Dr. Buckbee's map is gone doesn't mean that he won't find gold, right? So that's an interesting character trait I've kind of noticed about Praiseworthy, is that he's both optimistic and realistic. And I'll want to see if he continues this way throughout the story, or if things kind of change his attitude about that. It'll be really interesting to see. Jack said nothing about the pig. In the darkness and hurry of his escape, Cut-Eye Higgins must not have realized he had a curly-tailed companion aboard the boat. Jack was sorry about Dr. Buckbee and his treasure map, but he was pleased with Good Luck's good luck. The thief had no doubt beached the pig with the boat. Jack watched the green coast of Brazil slip further away and even smiled to himself. The porker was forever safe from the cook. That's the end of chapter 4, and now we are going to go on to chapter 5, Land of Fire. And you'll see in this picture, I don't see any land, I don't see any fire. So again, even though our chapter title is Land of Fire, and we know a chapter title tends to tell us a really important key detail or main idea about the chapter we're going to read, we know from the past that these pictures kind of tell us something important about what's going to happen in the story as well. It may not be the main important thing, but it could be something that occurs too. And I want to take this chance for you to see, so we've been calling the Lady Wilma and the Sea Raven a paddle wheeler or a side wheeler. And you can see in this picture especially, you can see the wheel on the side of the ship. And as coal is being burned to power the ship, it turns the paddles on the side of the boat. And that's what makes it move even when there is no wind, right? We learned that square riggers are boats that need wind. They don't have these paddles, they just use sails. And so I wanted you to be able to see what that sort of looked like. Let's read chapter 5, Land of Fire. The days grew shorter. The Lady Wilma beat her way toward the tip of South America, and summer faded quickly from the sea. Jack, who had been going barefoot for weeks to keep cool, now put on his shoes to keep warm. The gold seekers put away their straw hats and dug in their sea chests for woolen underwear. Off the coast of Patagonia, Jack awoke to find 6 inches of snow on deck and a school of sperm whales off the starboard bow. Soon the passengers were bundled up in great cocoons of clothing. Thin men looked like fat ones, and fat men looked enormous. Now, it's important to remember, this part's kind of reminding us, even though you continue going south, which is what they're doing, they're going all the way south to get to the bottom of Cape Horn, and then they'll turn up and start going north, right? Just because you're going south doesn't mean things get warmer, right? With our globe, we have our poles at the top, and both of our poles are incredibly cool places. And it's really the middle of our globe, the Earth, that is warm, that is temperate most of the year, right? And so if they were just in an area where it was summer, they were probably around this bend, right? They continued going south towards a pole. That means it's getting colder. And not only is it getting colder because they're going south towards a pole, but also time has passed. So it's a different time of year. So it's important for us to remember kind of the geography of it all, of their route and why they're going through these temperature changes, why they're going to be experiencing, you know, some of the weather they're going to be experiencing. So keep that in mind. Remember, they just went from really cold in Boston to really warm as they were in the middle of our globe heading towards South America, and even in Brazil, which is in South America. And now as they go even further south towards the pole, further south on South America, it's getting really cold again, right? For days, Praiseworthy and Jack watched the crew tighten the riggings and check the canvas against the coming winds and crashing seas of Cape Horn. An air of impending adventure ran through the ship. Jack listened to the tales of whaling ships disappearing forever from the roaring cape, of square riggers with their masts uprooted like trees, of brigs driven back by horrendous headwinds, and of barks wandering in endless fogs. Well, those were 3 different kinds of ships, by the way, but they didn't mention paddle wheelers, so. Nonsense, Praiseworthy would say. Mere sea yarns. And in case you didn't know, spinning a yarn is a phrase that was used back in the day for a made-up story, for making up a story. So if it's a sea yarn, it's a made-up story about the ocean, is what Praiseworthy is saying. He's trying to calm Jack down, right? Saying, this is a made-up story. It's just something they say, right? But even more forbidding, it seemed to Jack, were stories told of sea captains tempted by a shorter route to the Pacific through the narrow and vile-tempered Strait of Magellan. There, ships were sometimes cracked in two, like nuts between the rocky jaws of the passage. More than one brave captain had turned back for the tender mercies of Cape Horn itself. Stuff and nonsense, Praiseworthy would say, even though he believed every word of it. We may hit a bit of inclement weather, gentlemen, but our good captain will give the back of his hand to the Cape. He told me so himself. Why, the wild bull of the seas could navigate these waters with his eyes shut. Well, said Mr. Azariah Jones, I hope he doesn't try that. It'll suit me fine if he keeps both eyes open, and then some. The mountainous Yankee trader wore a muffler tied around his face as if he had a toothache to keep his ears warm. In the pilot house, Captain Swain studied his charts. The Sea Raven was obviously far in the lead, but San Francisco was yet a long way off. Captain Swain knew well enough of the storms lying in wait off the Horn. Winds that could drive a ship back 20 miles for every one it gained. Nevertheless, the nearer the Lady Wilma crept to the furious tip of the continent, the more eager Captain Swain became. They were waters to test a master's skill. Praiseworthy, who was not born to adventure, was surprised to find it decidedly to his liking. His face was weathering. On good days and bad, he took his brisk laps around deck and enjoyed the sting of the sea on his cheeks. I must admit, he said to Jack, that I'm rather keen on having a look at the notorious Cape. You might watch for the fires. Fires? Said Jack, attempting to keep up with Praiseworthy's long stride. At Tierra del Fuego. The captain tells me the natives keep great fires going day and night. Keep themselves and their sheep from freezing. Tierra del Fuego. Land of fire. That's what that name means. A burst of spray rose from the boughs and fell like rain. Land of fire, said Jack. I'll watch for it. Almost without warning, the first storm came roaring off the Arctic wastes and bore down on the paddle wheeler. The sun went out like a match. Long, shrieking winds loaded with hailstones struck the ship like buckshot. The oak wheel spun out of the hands of the quartermaster. The Lady Wilma went teetering over on her side, digging her ribs into the seas. Jack, who had just sat down to a bowl of chowder, saw the bowl fly off in one direction, the chowder in another, and the spoon in a third. I do believe we've arrived off the Horn, said Praiseworthy, hanging on to his bowler hat. Captain Swain lent a hand to the wheel, righting the ship and turning her bowsprit into the wind. In the main saloon, the gold seekers had been thrown together in a tangle of arms and legs. No sooner did they unravel themselves when another violent lurch of the ship knotted them together. The ship's bell rang in the wind. Howling blasts ripped off the tops of the waves. Riding the swells, the Lady Wilma seemed to climb halfway into the sky, only to drop with a crash into the throes. Jack got wild glimpses of the sea through a porthole, and if he was afraid, he was too busy hanging on to give it much thought. The sidewheeler burrowed into the storm. Seawater came rushing along the decks and slipped down the hatches like so many waterfalls. Sailors in their stocking caps were busy everywhere, battening the hatches and taking in every rag of canvas. A mere squall, said Praiseworthy, holding on to a post with the hook of his black umbrella. Why, in these latitudes, this is considered a fine spring day, I believe. The weather lasted more than a week. For a day or two, seabirds came out of the sky and rode the yardarms. The gold seekers emerged from their cabins, bruised and sleepless and hungry. Some said it was harder to eat than sleep, and others said it was harder to sleep than eat. But hardly had the seas calmed when another gale burst from the sky. Captain Swain no longer left the pilot house. The nights were now 16 hours long, and the days a mere glimmer of light. The Lady Wilma continued westing, fighting for every foot of water. Her paddle wheels thrashed hour after hour and day after day. Being experienced hands, Praiseworthy and Jack helped keep the fire roaring in the furnace. Despite the crash and thunder of the sea, the butler seemed unafraid, and Jack found comfort in being at his side. Wait, I'm going to read that again. Being experienced hands, Praiseworthy and Jack helped keep the fire roaring in the furnace. The furnace and the fire. Oh, the author is talking about, how they had to work in the coal bunker, shoveling coal and letting it burn in order to pay off their debt until they found out who the thief was, right? So it's kind of a joke about them having experience with the furnace. In a furnace, you have to put wood or coal in it to burn to get heat too. It's kind of funny. Whale oil lamps flickered in the passageways day and night, and it was hard to tell one from the other. The nights were the worst. Jack's hammock swayed and the cabin walls swung. If Mr. Azariah Jones wasn't pitched out of his bunk, it was Dr. Buckbee. More than once, Mountain Jim awoke to find them both sprawled across him. I've known grizzly bears that were a mite friendlier than this billy-behanged Cape Horn. Headwinds battled the paddle wheeler to a complete standstill, and Jack began to wonder if they would ever reach the Pacific. The Lady Wilma was thrashing with all her steam to stay in one place. But then a calm would set in, like a great practical joke. The moment passengers began to snore in their cabins, fresh winds would swoop down and jerk the ship awake. There'll be nothing to do but sleep when we reach the Pacific, Praiseworthy pointed out. The portholes were almost frozen over, and only once did Jack get a glimpse of land to starboard. Dark cliffs seemed to hang like draperies from the misty sky, and then the weather closed in again, and they were gone. Do you think there's any chance we might catch up with the Sea Raven? Jack asked, hanging on to his hammock. We could pass within 100 yards of each other without knowing it, Praiseworthy said. We can't get to San Francisco soon enough to suit me, put in Mr. Azariah Jones. I hope we win, said Jack. I don't think Captain Swain has the slightest intention of losing, said Praiseworthy. For 37 days, the side-wheeler battered and rammed her way through crashing headwinds that attempted to drive her back. And then, on a Tuesday morning, the sun broke out clear and sharp and hung like an ornament in the northern sky. One by one, the deck hatches opened and the gold seekers came on deck as if from some dark dungeon. Their eyes blinked in the unfamiliar brightness of the day. We've made it, yelled Mountain Jim, throwing down his yellow fur cap. Boys, here's the Pacific Ocean. A yell went up around the ship, and Captain Swain leaned out of the pilot house. His beard had grown an inch. He gave a hearty wave and then came out on the paddle box with his long glass. After a moment of sweeping the seas, he stopped. By grabs, he roared. There she is, the Sea Raven, and she's astern of us. Astern. Look. Astern. It's even in a different font. I think it's supposed to be important, but I don't know what astern means. I'm thinking it's like a boat term. I'm going to read on and see if I can figure out what it means from some of the other context clues, some of the other clues that are in the story. And if I can't, then I might need to go back and reread it and see if I can figure it out. The Sea Raven, and she's astern of us! Another yell went up, and the gold seekers rushed to the afterdeck for a look. There was the Sea Raven indeed, trailing far behind. It seemed to Jack the most exciting moment of his life. Okay, so astern means behind. So the stern must be the back of the boat. So astern would mean the Sea Raven is behind them. A remarkable performance, said Praiseworthy, but he was baffled. It seemed hardly possible that the Lady Wilma had charged ahead against the furies of the past 37 days. And yet, there stood the Sea Raven behind them as proof. I watched for the fires, said Jack, but I never did catch sight of them, Praiseworthy. Suddenly, the butler's eyes lit up. Why, Master Jack, you solved it! This is the second time that Praiseworthy has said that Jack has solved it. And I know that when authors repeat things, it's important. So I'm going to start noticing more when Praiseworthy does this, when he says that someone solved it, because I don't know what's been solved, and I don't think Jack does either. But this is something I want to pay attention to because the author has repeated it. Solved what? You didn't see the fires of Tierra del Fuego because they weren't to be seen. But you said, I mean to say, the fires were there, but we weren't. At that moment, Captain Swain had joined the gold seekers on the afterdeck. Jack had never seen him with such a wide and merry grin glowing from the depths of his whiskers. I hope you gentlemen enjoyed your passage round the Horn, said the wild bull of the seas. Captain, Praiseworthy said with a gleam in his eye, Master Jack appears to be on to your secret. What's that? We haven't been around the Horn, sir. Captain Swain gave Jack a twinkling glance. Is that so, lad? All I said was, said Jack, What he means is that you have pulled off a most daring piece of seamanship, sir, interrupted the butler. The reason Master Jack didn't catch sight of the green fires at Land's End, why, the reason, sir, is that you took the Lady Wilma through the deadly Strait of Magellan. The Strait of Magellan, you say? The captain rubbed his plump nose. Why, that's a regular ship's graveyard. And then he gave Jack a heavy squint. Of course, it cuts hundreds of miles off the voyage around the Horn. Hundreds of miles. A ship's master can be sorely tempted. You mean to say, sir, said Mr. Azariah Jones, turning white, that we've been bouncing around in that awful place? I confess, chuckled the captain. The lad here has found me out. Then he pointed to the Sea Raven. Look at her, following us gentlemen like a chick after a hen. So, I should have probably been able to figure this out, right? That they went through the Strait of Magellan, because the name of this chapter was Land of Fire, right? And so they told me already Land of Fire was going to be important. They told me exactly what the Land of Fire was, that we should be looking out for fires while we're on the ship, but Jack never really notices it, right? And we know that the captain is trying to beat the Sea Raven, and they mentioned that the Strait of Magellan, even though it was dangerous, was a shortcut, right? So the second they said they saw the Sea Raven, I should have put this together. Because we know that authors leave us breadcrumbs like this, right? They don't tell us right off, oh, he's taking the Strait of Magellan, it'll be faster, right? The author left us these little clues. And some of us put them together, and some of us are like me right now saying, oh my gosh, that's why they told us all that information, right? We talk about this in class that some things we add to show our craft in that we can elaborate or that we can describe, right? But sometimes we add things as authors to give little hints as to what is to come. And that's what this author, Sid Fleischman, just did a wonderful job with. All right, that was chapters 4 and 5 of By the Great Horn Spoon. I will see you for chapter 6 next time. Bye, room 13.